about floods. Nothing we have to worry about up here. But we do have two people from the Coastal Watershed Council who are going to be talking to us about the ecological impacts and resiliency of the San Lorenzo River watershed and community, which Gail so kindly discussed, how resilient we are up here. We've got Sam Adelson. Sam's a Felton resident, and he's the education coordinator for the Coastal Watershed Council's Watershed Rangers Youth Education Program, so get the young people involved. Sam has worked in watershed restoration and environmental education for over 15 years, and he serves on the Santa Cruz County Fish and Wildlife Advisory Commission. I think that's 3 people at least in the room. And in his free time, Sam's favorite hobbies include river snorkeling, foraging for edible mushrooms, ooh, that's scary, gardening and scuba diving, so I assume that's in the ocean. But we also have Erin Loury. Erin's the communications manager for the CWC, and she previously worked for 10 years as a communications director and a fish biologist at Fish Bio, which is it's basically a worldwide fisheries and environmental consulting company. And she graduated from the Moss Landing Marine Laboratories and the UC Santa Cruz Science Communications Program. So she's got a lot of really local experience and education. And she likes biking to work, I should say, and watching the birds along the San Lorenzo River Water Walk, which has become a treasure for many of us. So Erin and Sam, thank you for being here, and come on up.
Into the mic is helpful. Here we are. This is such a great event. Awesome to see familiar faces, new faces. This presentation will include new info and also kind of piggyback off of some of the discussions that have already been happening. And away we go. I'm Sam. Erin's in the house. We're going to tag team this presentation. And we're representing the Coastal Watershed Council. Since 1995, CWC has been dedicated to protecting and preserving the San Lorenzo River and connecting the community to this amazing resource. Our current focus is the urban stretch of the river in downtown Santa Cruz within the confines of the San Lorenzo River's levee. We're going to be talking about the ecological impacts of floods, especially thinking back not this past wet year, but the prior water year, and how devastating that has been, but also how there are some silver linings on that cloud. In this presentation, we're going to talk about some of the natural and unnatural history of the San Lorenzo watershed, some negative and positive ecological impacts from flooding. We'll talk about Coastal Watershed Council's work connecting people and planet and that relationship with floods. We'll share some actionable steps for the community, wrap up with some conclusions, and open things for questions from you all. As was done at the beginning of this event, I would like to remind us all that the land we're on has been stewarded for over 10,000 years by indigenous communities. I'd like to read this land acknowledgement as you observe this beautiful illustration of what life along the San Lorenzo River has been like. The land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking Yupi and Sayanta tribes. The Amamutsan tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. So, the San Lorenzo River watershed. Never heard of it? It is 138 square miles in area, about 29 miles long. It's naturally really steep, erosive, has lots of fine sediments and faults, so this is a very dynamic system we're talking about. We have a high annual rainfall, 47 inches on average, And that's info from Boulder Creek, so the rainfall rates really are variable across our watershed. Santa Cruz receives less rainfall than kind of our headwaters regions. Our watershed supports really unique habitats, including the redwoods. We have sandhills, maritime chaparral, oak woodlands, coastal prairies. And that supports incredible biology, habitat for many of Santa Cruz's 7,900 species. I got the info from iNaturalist. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, you should check it out. It is a community science database. Take a picture of a plant or an organism, push search, it will tell you, it will reference the geography and where you are, it will tell you what species that is, and you can upload it so that other people can track those species as well. It's used by really serious scientists, and kids use it. It's almost like the Pokemon Go for nature. In that count of 7,900 species includes 30 rare and protected species. Unnaturally, and to piggyback off the awesome talk about Santa Cruz and San Lorenzo Valley culture, we've had some pretty heavy-duty extractive industries, including logging and quarries, those 3 L's that we're learning about. We've removed some really important species like beavers that have really contributed as ecosystem engineers to help design, though that's probably not what they're thinking about, a really beneficial habitat for all sorts of animals. So without the beavers and with those extractive industries, we've had really severe impacts to the morphology, the shape of the river, how the water moves, and how the plants can grow. You can see this diagram in the top right. The dotted line up at the top kind of shows when the river typically would be high, it would access that floodplain every 1 to 2 years, maybe on average. The natural channel on the right side, you can see kind of a dark line. That's my attempt to have a tributary coming in on the right side of that image into a natural channel. But because of the ways that we historically have treated this watershed, we have in lots of places a really incised channel. The photo below I took at Henry Cowell just a couple weeks ago. Instead of having a floodplain that's 6 feet above the water line, we're looking at 15 feet now. So a lot of the potential for accessing and utilizing the floodplain in this valley, unfortunately, doesn't really happen anymore because of this incision. So there's a lot of work going on to figure out how do we build up the stream channel so the water can spill over, how can we navigate or recreate some of that floodplain habitat. But alas, I'll also say this could be a 2-hour presentation or a 2-day conversation with everyone, so I'm going to try my best to stick on track too. I might not get into as much detail as some of you might be interested, but I'm hoping to cover something that everyone will have a take-home message to share with your family and friends. We've also had extensive septic systems and sewer networks that, when not taken care of properly, can introduce sewage into our ecosystem. And the city of Santa Cruz is responsible for meeting the drinking water demands for over 100,000 residents. And that doesn't mean we're just importing water from somewhere else. This area relies 100% on its own local water supply, which is really different from lots of other places in California. The San Lorenzo River experiences floods, as you all well know. Historically, the San Lorenzo River migrated all over the valley floor and the flatlands of Santa Cruz. Despite roads, buildings, and levees in its way, in big storms, this river still tries. You can see on the left is a kind of classic, almost everyday picture that you would see looking downstream at the Water Street Bridge. And the photo on the right shows that same perspective on January 9th, 2023. This is what we're talking about. Here are some of the wettest years on record. A lot of these have been referenced already. Some of the biggest storms that continue to be, guiding some of the ideas of how this watershed reacts to high flows. This is information from the San Lorenzo Valley Water District, taken from Boulder Creek. So 1889 and 90 water year was massive. 2022, 2023, down on the far right side, 71 inches. Our average rainfall is 47, as noted in this dark blue line that spans across the graph. And we're about on average this year. So if you're curious, where are we now? I think we're pretty much around average, at 47 inches. Floods obviously have some pretty heavy negative impacts. on our watershed and our human community. I'm going to just kind of gloss over 5 different aspects of watershed health and life. Water quality can be negatively impacted by floods in the sense that saturated septic systems can leak sewage into the San Lorenzo River. Turbidity, which is the clarity of the water, we see it looking like chocolate milk almost every time after it rains. Sediment in the water isn't necessarily always a bad thing, but it can have some issues. It can clog things. It can cause undue wear for fish gills, for migrating salmonids, among lots of other things. Water quantity can be impacted by large flood events. Overland flow, especially when the ground is saturated, causes pollution from stormwater runoff, as pictured in this top right photograph. Plants can be impacted in these high flood events. Just the high habitat disturbance, soils moving around, rocks are washing away, hillsides are slumping. Wildlife can be impacted, their habitat can be destroyed or altered, their migration similarly. And people are impacted. I'm sure all of you had experienced some sort of impacts after, atmospheric river after atmospheric river after atmospheric river. It wears on you, damage to property, road closures, stress, strain emergency response, all that. But that's not exactly what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to uplift the reality that floods are a natural occurrence and that this watershed, maybe humans aside, has really depended on and thrives with these high flow events. So I'm going to revisit water quality, water quantity, plants, wildlife, and people, but instead of talking about the doom and gloom of how floods damage and destroy things, I'm actually going to turn the tables and talk about how important floods are. Yeah! Okie doke. Again, I'm really not going to dive in, hopefully. If I stay on track, I'm not going to be diving too deep into any of these, but let's continue. So, talking about water quality and quantity. We have lots of rain, we have lots of infiltration and groundwater recharge, which results in higher flows, not only just during the summer, but generally speaking, and not just the year after these events, but actually for multiple years. High flows cause sediment plumes that go out into the ocean, which are migration cue for salmonids. High flows dilute, flush out pollution, debris, nutrients, bacteria, which leaves our watershed cleaner than before. Unfortunately, that all goes into the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, so that's a bit of a bummer. The churning of the water really creates highly oxygenated habitat for organisms that breathe the river. And Loch Lomond drinking water reservoir gets filled to the brim. Shifting to sediment and streamwood, there are really a lot of positive impacts when we have these high flow events, including successful sediment transport. Rivers are essentially sediment conveyor belts. They're bringing rocks and sands and silts from the top of the mountains out to the ocean, and all those little bits of sediment get used for one reason or another, generally speaking, on their way to the ocean. We have deposition of that sediment and organic material, which rejuvenates soil fertility, especially in aquatic and riparian plants. Imagine that silt and leaves kind of settling on your root system. You're going to be good to go. Existing gravel, or erosion brings fresh gravel into the river, which is really important. This gravel is a requirement for salmonids in where they lay their eggs. And existing gravel beds, maybe they get covered in silt over time or get mud that clogs up the crevices between the rocks so that these eggs, when the salmonids lay them, can't hatch. But when we have high flows, the high flows really move a lot of that sediment and silt away from the gravel beds, so they're cleaning the gravel beds when we have these high flow events, which means we'll have more successful spawning in the future. And high flow events also bring an accumulation of streamwood clusters, or large woody debris, or log jams, or however it is you want to describe them. These streamwood clusters increase channel complexity, they sort sediment, they provide refuge and habitat for wildlife, and they're often actually passable in high flows, whether it's a little nook that a steelhead senses a change in pressure, or a deep pool that they can hop over this jam. So these aren't end-all, be-all issues that are going to inhibit salmonid migration necessarily. We're going to talk about plants and plant associates, but let's take a quick pause just to appreciate how beautiful and how lucky we are to have some of these fascinating organisms in our watershed. Take a breath. I work with kids, so taking breaths is a really important part of my work. All right, so maybe in the mind, having a flood, the plants get buried, they're too wet, the soil's too saturated with water, the roots can't breathe. But in fact, plants really benefit from these high flow and rainfall events. Floods help disperse nutrients, seeds, and sprigs. If a branch of a willow tree gets torn off and floats down the river a mile and gets jammed into a muddy bank, that is going to turn into a full-grown willow tree, which might grow into a willow thicket, which has a huge benefit for ecology. Riparian plants, in their existence along the river edges, slow water velocity, they provide habitat, and they increase channel complexity. We actually see increased success for many plants with bulbs or rhizomes, including rushes, sedges like tule, ferns and horsetails, members of a berry group in the rubus family, and creeping wild rye, which is a rhizomatous native grass. In fact, buckeye seeds, seen up top, they have evolved to roll downhill, and they float. In the bottom right photo, you can see this buckeye seed is inundated, it's been transported, and it actually needs inundation for germination. So these plants have evolved alongside floods. They're not shocked when it rains a bunch. They've got tools to navigate those issues. Continuing on with plants, a lot of native species can actually outcompete non-natives and dominate after flood events. If you are a plant from England and you're out here and it's hot and dry in the summers and it's cold and then it gets super duper wet and you're underwater for 3 weeks, you're not going to survive, but a lot of those rhizomatous plants that I already mentioned will pop right back up. And on my walks this winter and in past winters, that's exactly what I'm seeing along the river's edge. Wildflower blooms after wet winters support a diverse food web. It brings pollinators, it brings things that eat pollinators, it brings things that eat those pollinators, and those things that eat them. We have lots of native plants that filter pollution, especially nutrients, uptaking nitrogen and stuff that might be out and about in the watershed that in some cases in high amounts can be considered pollution, is actually food for a lot of the native plants. And then we also have the strong, deep roots, and in bold, mycelial networks. I can't stress how important healthy fungal networks are for the health of our watershed. They help to hold sediment in place, securing stream banks, and allowing water to infiltrate. A couple more deep breaths. Shout out to the wildlife of the San Lorenzo River watershed. Especially this osprey carrying a lamprey. That picture's awesome. Thank you, Max.
Wow.
So similar to plants, when we have high flood and rainfall events, it does not mean the end of the wildlife. In fact, it supports them. Wildlife has evolved alongside floods. The floods can impede upstream migration of invasive species like the New Zealand mud snail. I will shout out to what is not a New Zealand mud snail. This is the San Lorenzo River shoulder band snail. It is found only in the Santa Cruz Mountains. High flow supports salmon migration. Floods form in-stream habitat like riffles, pools, wood clusters, and benthic macroinvertebrate habitat. All of those are critical to successful salmonid life cycles. Life cycles are timed with flood cycles, so we're not having to worry about what's going to happen to that little tadpole in the middle of the winter. Tadpoles are born in the spring. It's similar to steelhead trout and salmon, are really good at knowing when those levels are going to drop. It's not always the case, but they've got this pretty well figured out. They've been doing it for like 1 million years or more. Increased biological productivity, more water equals more food. These wildlife have figured out how to successfully navigate a lot of the obstructions and obstacles in the river. When we have a lot of rain, we have more wetlands and pond habitat for amphibians. New riparian plant growth supports a diverse food web for wildlife. And floods can also benefit people. Sandy beaches and driftwood, heavy rains form ocean sandbars for surfing. We get new pools in the San Lorenzo River for dunking. Please pack your trash. Loch Lomond is full, so that means we have an abundant drinking water supply. We have awesome recreation opportunities there like boating and fishing. Streamwood clusters make better habitat for fishing. We have unique wildlife viewing after a lot of rain, whether it's super blooms or bird watching in marshes and wetlands. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Erin to share with you how the Coastal Watershed Council is working to address floods and flood concerns by connecting people and planet. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Sam. That was a great overview of the watershed and the environment. I'm just going to take a few minutes at the end here to bring people into the picture and talk about some of Coastal Watershed Council's work related to flooding. And so one of those things is responding to floods and storms when they do happen. These are some of the few of the hundreds of volunteers that we helped mobilize last winter that helped clean up over 3,000 pounds of trash along this lower San Lorenzo River in January. So we do recognize, as important as it is for the ecosystem, that flood control is critical to the city of Santa Cruz's relationship with the San Lorenzo River. And so because of that, we've advocated for flood control to be a guiding principle of projects like the ongoing San Lorenzo Park redesign. So as a result of that advocacy, some hydrological analyses have been conducted to just explore the potential of implementing a river side channel in the park to help absorb more of that flow. Oh, these are some two of the potential schematics of what that side channel might look like. But we also work to try to find a healthy balance between flood control along the levees and also trying to restore a thriving riparian ecosystem in the lower river. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA require that the plants along the levee get pruned every year for flood control and also so the levees can be inspected for damage. And we have successfully advocated for that vegetation management to be more ecologically guided. And so as a result, this past fall, the contractors that were hired left more plants in place during that pruning, and that meant more habitat available for the wildlife. Our organization also is continuing to plant and now seed native plants along the lower river between Selkow Avenue and Laurel Street bridges. Our river ecologist Kaya is here. And we organize monthly volunteer river health days. They're usually the second Saturday of every month, so we invite all of you to come out and join us, and that information is on our website. Finally, we're working to help raise flood awareness through public arts in some of the communities that are most vulnerable to flooding, including the beach flats. This imagery shows so dramatically why the beach flats is particularly vulnerable to flooding, both from the mouth of the San Lorenzo River and the ocean. So some of the things that we've done is working with artists to help design murals around the storm drains in the community to draw attention to these important flows to the river to keep them clear of trash and pollution. We've also worked with the City of Santa Cruz to develop community-informed emergency preparedness materials like resource guides and checklists. And we currently are hosting artists in residence that are working to create some resources related to flooding. They've turned that packing list into a comic book that we have available at our table, are creating some artwork, including this mural design. The lower picture is the Aztec goddess of rivers and streams that's going to be painted on the Nueva Vista Center in the beach flats. So finally, these are just some things that all of us can be doing to help make both the river and our communities more resilient in the face of floodings, which we know will happen. Some of these have been mentioned already, but I will say coming to meetings like this is a great first step, so kudos to all of you. You're on it already. And then just with the water that's on our properties, trying to slow it and spread it, sink it, get it into the ground before it runs off into the river. Things like rain gardens and bioswales, planting those native plants, being prepared for floods. So just some final thoughts. As Sam mentioned, floods are a natural part of our watershed, and the wildlife has evolved alongside it for thousands and millions of years. And these floods do have many benefits. While we do want to acknowledge, though, that there are still negative impacts that humans have played a hand in creating, and that we also need to learn to be prepared for as we're facing the probability of more intense and frequent floods in the future. And just recognizing that our river is a complex natural system, and its restoration is going to require a holistic approach and involvement of all of us. But that help is critically important for all of the residents, especially for ourselves, and we can all play a role in its restoration. So, as we like to say, teamwork makes the stream work. So, thank you very much to all these folks who have helped perform this presentation.
We just have a couple of minutes for questions for Sam or Erin. Anybody? I think you covered it all so well.
Yeah,
Is there someone, I'm sorry, Don?
Yeah, I've heard several, that was a great presentation, I thought. I've heard several negative references to septic systems today. And I just want you to know, as a fishery biologist, I see septic systems as very important to providing water recycling to the groundwater and then into the stream. We've had like 2/3 of the last 16 years have been dry years. And the fish really depend on that recycling through the septic systems to provide base flow in the summer. Growth and survival of juveniles is directly related to how much stream there is. So I can see where we might need to sewer certain local communities along the river, but back in the early 80s, the SOE Water District wanted to sewer the whole valley. And the thing that killed that with the EIR was that it would reduce base load so much that it had a very negative effect on fish. So septic systems are very good in that they maintain base load. We do have more nutrients coming into the lagoon, and that makes that more utility. But for the rest of the watershed, the septic is not a problem for fish. And I work on Soquel Creek at the lagoon there. I've done that for 30-some years. And it's a very eutrophic lagoon, but as long as there's enough base flow coming in, it's very good habitat for squid. So once the city gets their outlet structure working correctly, and they don't need to breach the sandbar so much, it could be a very healthy system, even though you have more nutrients coming in. So I hope that in the future we don't get this idea that we need to sewer the whole valley. Because once that water is sewered and sent out to the ocean, it's lost. The city of Santa Cruz, all their sewered water just goes out in the ocean. It's lost.
Thank you, Don. That's really an important concept. I mean, maintaining your septic system is an important concept as well. And that's where some of those issues can happen, where it's the effluent is at the surface instead of doing what it's supposed to do, going underground. Question back there?
It's hard to hear you.
Oh, sorry. Right. I was just mostly talking to Don. Sorry. But no, I was really talking to all of you because it is important that we maintain our septic systems and that we assure that the effluent is not coming to the surface in these high rain events, and that they're actually functioning the way they're supposed to do, because we do need that water restored to the base water. So thank you. Excellent concept, Don. Don is our local fishery biologist, so in case you don't know he's been around a long time and he knows the fish intimately. Thank you very much.